I mean, I had some fucking rough betrayals and things like that happen in my life. And there's a little bit of me that's a little bit jaded and a little bit fucking angry and a little bit hurt. And I have to risk letting that go to some degree. I have to risk letting go of that identity that's been built to protect me from that ever happening again. And that's fucking scary. Because it's like, well, what if it happens again? And it's like, well, yeah, but that's not you. You were just, that makes perfect sense why you did that. It makes perfect sense why you did that. But now it's stopping you. Now it's limiting you. Now it's making you get on this really safe train again. The risk would be, can you take that armor off? Can you stop? Can you choose something that's more in line with your true heart and values? And yeah, that's scary. Yeah, that's a risk. This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Exploring the challenges of the creative call
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
Welcome to the show, people. This is another podcast episode with Brandon and Evan. We don't know what we're talking about today. We had a big conversation beforehand. Got, I don't know, pretty emotional. We're talking about a bunch of stuff, and we're like, well, let's just record. We'll see what happens. I guess I'll start by saying this. The journey of an artist, I think, is sometimes highly emotional because you're not, like, things are not as predictable, and you're not on a train that's steady. You're more like on a roller coaster experience with highs and lows and ups and downs. And I heard a talk the other day, and I thought this really resonated with me. And I'd say this is particularly true for artists. The speaker was talking about, I don't know who it was, but they were speaking about how, like, there's this saying that the harder you work, the luckier you get. And he's like, if you look at, it's not actually true. There's lots of people that work really hard and they don't get lucky. There's no real benefit for their hard work. Although hard work counts and it's important, that doesn't actually make sense. He's like, actually, what would be more accurate of a statement is to say, the more risk you take, the luckier you get. And I think artistry is all about risk. Everything is about risk. Am I going to do this project or that project? Am I going to go after this expression, or am I going to play it safe? What are you going to do? Right. And I think it's so emotional because with risk, a lot of the time it doesn't work out, and you have to kind of accept that. And that's part of the artist's journey. And sometimes I think when we take a risk and it doesn't go as we want, we can end up getting maybe hurt or jaded or whatever, and then that can start to cloud us. And then we go, oh, maybe I won't take a risk because last time it didn't work out. But I think the artists that I've noticed who have succeeded in their careers and the people who have created either something great or they've ended up having some success is they stay at it. They take another risk. They take another risk. And I mean, there's so many artists that I know who have had heartbreak moments where they're like, I was so close. It was between me and this one other person. And then in the last minute, they chose this other person. I've had that experience for myself on an audition as well, or auditions. Yeah, so I do think there's something about that. I don't know. Maybe Evan wants to entertain this idea. I'm going to shove it over to you. See what you think.
Oh, no, that was, I was not expecting you to take it to where you took it. But I like it. I like this. Talking about risk is, I think, an interesting conversation to entertain and get into. And I've also been there as well as an actor, like a number of times where it was between like me and one other person for a role. One time there was an experience where I was actually the director's first choice, but the studio wanted to work with this other person because they had worked with them before. And it was just like, oh, and yeah, talk about like how that can make you jaded and stuff when you go, it's like, how the hell are you supposed to feel when you're the director's first choice and yet you still don't get the part? I remember that was a tough one to swallow at one point in time. That's how the game goes sometimes, and you celebrate the victory that are there, the victories that you do get with that. I think that's important, but there's still a grieving that needs to occur there as well. It's an interesting one. But yeah, risks are, I wrote a blog article some years back about taking risks. And I don't remember how I said all of these things. I'm going to try and do it because I remember I felt when I finished it, I was able to actually articulate something that was really what I actually was able to say, the thing that I was really trying to say in the whole thing. Because, I'd heard a lot from acting teachers and stuff like that, where it's like, well, take risks, right? Also be interesting, like, sorry, not be interesting, but like make interesting choices, which is like, it's like I found that those things were actually kind of traps. Like those pieces of advice on their surface are very kind of dangerous because it can lead you to you just doing things in your art for their own sake. It's like, oh, that's risky if I do it this way, or if that would be interesting. And it's like, well, you don't actually really know that, like, because now you're working from a place of what you think would be interesting, what you think would be risky, right? And that's all based on stuff that you've seen before. That's all based on some already existing thing, right? Which means that it's already been done. Mm-hmm. It's already been seen. So it's going to lead you very often to a place that is contrived, right? And to me, I would sort of reframe those things of like taking risks as a call to follow through on the true impulses that you have on the things that you're creating. Because that's something that I have noticed in my own experience, where it's like, I have this impulse to do something in performance or in writing, or, the things that I've immersed myself in artistically. And I have many moments where I didn't follow through, where it's like, oh, I can't do that, right? But the thing is that creativity is a spontaneous thing, and when those spontaneous things happen, you're wise to act on them. You're wise to move on that thing as it's arising in the moment, because it's in response to something. I mean, I would say most of the time, 99% of the time, it's in response to something that's actually real, that's actually going on. And when you just do that thing, very often that's the thing that people be like, whoa, what an interesting choice. What a risky thing. And it's like, but the thing is, like, you're just like, that didn't even fucking factor into it. Right? But it just was on the outside of it. But when you go into it as a sort of like, be risky or whatever, sometimes you just need to maybe use that as the thing that allows you to act on it, right? It's like, oh, I shouldn't do, like I have the impulse, I shouldn't do it. It's like, no, take the risk, right? That's when you can sort of maybe give yourself that pep talk, right? Where it's like, yeah, it feels a little uncomfortable. It feels a little unsafe. It feels a little bit risky potentially. But you start acting on those impulses, and especially once you start to see that they typically lead you to a pretty good place, or at least, maybe the outcome of it is not the thing that you would really want, but you can never really feel bad about the fact that you did it. Mm-hmm. That's, I think, and whenever you can feel good about the work that you're doing, like that's a freaking win. Because again, as my sort of little personal anecdote sort of shares, is like, look, a lot of things aren't even up to you, especially in the acting world, right? It's like, you can be the director's first choice and you still won't get it. Yeah. But can you still, you can feel good about that fact, but you can feel good about the work that you did because you did good work. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I think this is the part about risk which isn't always talked about, which is that the fact that you took a risk and you tried something is so much of what the victory is, regardless of the outcome. And I think that we get caught up in the idea of results and like, oh, if I didn't get the outcome I wanted, that somehow this was a big failure and it didn't work out. And I think, honestly, I think that's all programming, and it's actually like non sequitur. It doesn't follow. It doesn't work. It doesn't actually add up. In a world where um in a world where people want you to do a job for them, or they like, and like we talk about jobs or something like that, where you know there is a certain amount of, okay, we need you to do this consistently, predictably. We need you to get the result and not make a mistake. And it's a low risk environment, predictability, that's meant to be repeated over and over and over again. And it gets very monotonous and very boring. And that's why people are like, oh, good, Friday is coming. I got the weekend. And then finally, you don't have to do the monotonous, boring thing. Although sometimes I think we end up falling back into like patterns that are monotonous and boring. And we're like, oh man, I wasted my weekend doing this thing. And it's like, you know, if you work a 5-day work week, for example, I'm just giving an example. On that weekend, did you do what you did last weekend? Did you do what you did for the last 3 weekends, last 4, the last several, right? And the thing is if you are, what you're in is you're in a low risk cycle, because now you actually have the freedom and the spare time to do something, but you're just following back into a pattern because of whatever. It's comfortable, it's easy, it's whatever. And the thing is that I think leads to a very like unfulfilling, unsatisfying kind of life, and that people get caught in that cycle. I mean, we all do, it happens, right? But you might ask yourself, it's like, well, for example, if you're working a job like that, you got 52 weekends theoretically. But then you go, well, I don't have all these weekends to myself. Some of them I'm accountable to other people. Some of them are like a Christmas or a birthday or a wedding or something's going on where it's not really about me. It's going to be about something else, and I'm going to be doing that. So let's say you got 40 weekends out of your year. You look at all the things you want to do in your life and you go, well, what adventures do you want to do? What experiences do you want to have? Who do you want to meet? What do you want to do? What do you want to create? What's going on? That's where risk comes in, where you got to step out and do something that, isn't within the comfort realm. And I think that that's where all the rewards are. But, I think there's a patterning towards let's get it right. Let's do what's safe. Let's not cause any damage, And I think as an artist, you have to throw that out a little bit. Like, and people who struggle with relationships, I would say you have to throw that out as well, because like one of the best ways to build a good relationship, whether it's just a platonic friend or a romantic relationship, is banter. And the only way to have good banter is to take risks. And the only way to take risks is you have to be willing to do things that are not always kind of the right thing. And that might be like taking a little jab at somebody to kind of like push them a little bit. And then they banter back. And what you find out with banter is, there's sensitivity levels and stuff. And some friends, you can say like the most fucked up stuff to each other and you're like howling with laughter because you're like, fuck you, fuck you, whatever. It's kind of like going, but some people are really sensitive and you have to be very delicate in the banter you can play with them because they just take it too personally or they're too serious. But the thing is if you look at it, it's often more fun with the people who can rally back and not be so sensitive and not take it so seriously. And, the thing is that the people who don't take things so seriously, they have banter, they take risks, they jab and they have fun with each other, not in a cruel way, but in a fun, playful way. That's what people are drawn to. Those are the relationships. Like if you look at like anybody who tends to attract a lot of people, they tend to have good banter. And they tend to have a kind of, they keep you on your toes. It's a little bit like, I don't know what to expect here. The people who what you're going to get, who play it safe, who always do the right thing, they become very boring. It's very vanilla and it's very bland. And I would argue that it's the same for artists. You know, if you have all these actors come in and do a part and they all do it the safe way, they all do it just right and they get it just right and they do it just the way it's supposed to be done. They're so nice. It's like fucking boring. It's just like, I've just seen 10 people come in and do the exact same thing and like there's minor differences in how they look. And it's just like nothing's happening. And then someone comes in and the moment happens, but the moment happens and they respond to it. And then another moment happens. And sometimes you're, as a director, you're watching the reader get caught up in the moment. And that's really fucking cool because all of a sudden you're like, whoa, this scene's taking a fucking run. It's taking a turn. And as an actor, I mean, I've been in that experience too. But it is very hard because I think as actors, for example, I'm talking about that, I'm not trying to jump around, but there's pressures. Because as an actor, you're like, well, I want to do a good job. I want to impress the casting director or the director or the producers. I want to make sure that they know I can do the job. And so that's where you have this demand on safety. But in some ways, you have to take a risk. That's what's going to make them know you can do the job. And you might make a fool of yourself, but I would suggest that if we didn't look at failure or not getting the result or something going wrong as such a negative thing, if we looked at it as like, oh, you know what, I tried that and it didn't really work, and we bounced back from it, people are very forgiving. It's when we make a mistake and then we go, oh God, I made a mistake. That's when people get very nervous around you. But if you make a mistake and you go, man, I tried that, it did not work, did it? You're like, no, okay, no worries. You know what? In my mind, or I thought it would go this way, it just didn't go this way, you know? And the thing is that's artistry. Artistry is a lot of the time you try something, see if it works, and then if it doesn't, you have some feedback and you can try something else. But if you don't try anything, you don't get any feedback.
Yeah, and very often the thing that didn't work leads you to the thing that does. Exactly. Right? Like it very often I find that it contains the seed of the thing that does work, right? But allowing yourself to move on that thing, because again, I want to bring it back to this thing of impulse, right? And or a word that came up for me as you were talking was a word we like around here, which is curiosity, right? There's something about a curiosity that's a fantastic starting point, right? Because there's something about a curiosity that isn't necessarily rational, you know, like to me, it's like, that's why it kind of gives us these, it's a type of intuition that we have, right? Where it's like, I don't know exactly why, but I feel kind of called to this thing. I'm kind of interested in this thing, right? Which is one of my old acting teachers used to say, like, you'll become interesting when you get interested, right? So it's like you get interested in the thing that's going on. You get interested in and you put your attention on that thing. Go into it, right? And things come out of that, right? Like there's a quality, there's a real tangible quality to it, even as an audience member when you're watching somebody who's really engaged in the thing that they're doing. But this is all to say that, like, yeah, sometimes just following that thing where you go, it's like, I don't know exactly why, but I have an interest in this thing. And it's like, okay, well, go into it. Yeah. Right? Go and check that out. Because very often also, you go into that and you'll come up against some kind of internal resistance to it very often. It's like, well, I can't do that. I've never done that thing before. Why, like, blah, 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 blah. It's like, who fucking cares? Right? Like, it's like, that's not what that's there for. Just go into it. Right? Like, it's a little bit of mystery in your life that's there. And when you start going into those things, those are risks that you're doing, right? Those are the things that are kind of risky, where you as like because we're kind of on the acting train here, but it's like, as an actor, if you have something where it's like, I don't know exactly why, but I kind of think that this character, like they've got like they've just like, there's always a lump in their throat. They're always walking around with a lump in their throat. I don't know, just off the top of my head, right? And you just play around with that, right? Next thing you know, it's doing something to the way that you're talking and the way that you're behaving. And all of a sudden it's like, and all of a sudden it's like, what the fuck is going on? Like it's like you start watching, what is going on with this person? And you can explore that and start to go, it's like, oh yeah. And you can connect it to whatever psychology or something about this person and find it and mine it for all kinds of stuff. Without getting into it. But sometimes there's just, I've gotten intuitions like that, or little things like, oh, I kind of feel like there's just this thing here and I'm curious about it. I'm going to go and check it out. Right. And it can lead to all kinds of stuff. And then people go, what was that? Like, how did you? And it's like, it comes out of some part of you, right? It comes out of a part of your complete intelligence, right? That again is beyond necessarily just a rational thing, because the rational thing is often the thing that's going to stop you from taking action on the impulses, right? Which is why it's like keeping that thing in check as to like where its place is. But I mean, again, it's those things when you explore the curiosities, the intuitions, and you allow yourself to kind of give those things some expression in your art, in your life, these things, those are the things that are risks, right? And they carry with them something that's really alive, and very often very fascinating if it's like in the art space to an audience as well, because it's just like, it comes from somewhere that's a little bit wild and unpredictable.
Yeah, I think also like something that's coming up about this is that exposing yourself for who you really are is a frightening concept to people, because I think a lot of the time we're not as well worked out as we like to pretend we are. And and I think that what ends up happening is when you truly put yourself out there, you get an interaction from things, and it doesn't go as you like, and it can feel very personal. But the thing is that you don't know you're flawed until you come up to something and then you authentically do it with your flawed self, and then you see how your flaw is actually a problem. And I think there's a lot of time where the reason why we play it safe is because we don't want to admit we're flawed, first of all. It's a big problem. And then we don't want to have to change our flaw. We want it to just be accepted and want it to be okay. Let's go back to relationships for a second. It's like people say, oh, well, I want you to like me for me. It's like, well, yeah, fine. But the thing is like, you as a person, like as a being, people can like you and they can accept you. But like, it doesn't mean they want to be around you. It doesn't mean they want to share things with you. It doesn't mean they want to get intimate or bring you close into their life. Because if you're just like a fucking Danny Downer, Debbie Downer type of person, you're just like a fucking everything is a negative story. There's a lot of people that are just like, I don't want to be around that. And it's like, look, I get it. Life's hard for you, and that's what you're focused on, and that's your attention. That's where your attention's going. But the thing is like, I don't want that in my world. And so, well, why don't you like me for me? It's just who I am. It's like, yeah, well, you got to fucking change. And the reality is that, you got to change, or you got to find someone that wants that, and the reality too, in some ways, is sometimes you don't want people to accept you as you are, because who you are is not the version of you that you really want to be. And feedback's fucking brutal sometimes, because then you realize, oh shit, like I gotta evolve. And there's a risk, right? There's a risk in letting go of your stories and letting go of your shit, right? And man, I mean, even like just our talk leading up to this, it's like, oh yeah, there I am getting caught in my fucking bullshit again, right? And it's like, even for you, like Evan, you gave me some feedback and you're like, well, don't take this the wrong way. And it's like, you have to preface it with that, because you're about to give me some real fucking feedback. And it's like, I could get all sensitive about it and I could get fighty about it, But I think I've been around long enough in my life. I've done enough work where I've just been like, well, if someone's going to give you feedback, it's not personal, like in the sense that it's not an attack against you, but like I've had events happen in my life and sometimes it's easy to get jaded. It's easy to like look back at those moments and go, hey, you know what? I don't ever want that to happen again. And people are this way and whatever. And you're like, all of a sudden you got all these guards up and all this stuff. And then you say you want something and you have all these guards up. And it's like, well, the risk now is, are you willing to take the guards down? Are you willing to open up again? Are you willing to, you know, go into life and try these things, you know? And I really do like going back to that kind of thing that writer or that speaker said, which was like, you don't get lucky by hard work. You get lucky by the risks you take. I mean, the risk you take after you've been burned or after you feel a little jaded or a little negative, the risk is to take down the fucking armor and to go at it again like you did before the event happened. But at the same time, still have the wisdom and awareness that those types of things can happen. And, you know, you don't always know where things come from either. I mean, I do think that like ultimately we want people to love us for who we are. But I think the error in that thinking is that we don't participate in that. And the first thing is you have to love you for who you are, because then if you do, you don't really need someone else to love you. So if you don't really love yourself and you're trying to get someone to love you for you, what you're doing is you're immediately stepping into a dependent relationship, which is ultimately going to be toxic and bad. So the first thing you need is to be like, well, I like who I am. But if you don't really like who you are, that's the first like real risk, is like to go, well, fuck, I don't really like that I'm being this way. Because then that if you can admit that, then you go, well, I need to change. I'll say one last thing. You know, markers for attraction. I'm talking about relationships a little bit. Markers for attraction. I'm not saying that across the board everybody wants the same thing. But if there's markers for attraction, like, are you healthy? Are you fit? Are you muscular? Are you toned? Are you whatever? And these are uncomfortable things when we're not, you know? But the thing is it tends to be that's what's valued and that's what people want. And in some cultures, being a little bit heavier set means you're well fed, which means you're wealthy. So that's a marker of attraction. The thing is that you have to consider that markers of attraction matter in what you're doing. So, you know, if you are not like adding up to a marker of attraction and you want someone to be attracted to you, you have to look at yourself and go, well, fuck, I'm not adding up. I'm not doing what I need to do to do the thing. And this is where the personal growth comes in, I think. It's like it's a risk to take these things. It's painful, it's uncomfortable. But the thing is that you have to go and you have to look at it and go, well, if I want this thing, there is a path to it. And it's not always clear. Like sometimes you go, well, shit, okay, well, if I just get fit, then I'm going to attract the person. No, you're going to have to work on your personality. You're going to have to work on your whole demeanor. You're going to have to work on your perspective of the world. You're going to have to work on your attitude. You're going to have to work on all this shit. And then people, I think at a certain point, they go throw their hands up in the air and go, well, what's the point? I'm so far away from the fucking mark. Well, this is why I go back to this point. And this is from the storyteller. I know I sound like I'm fucking all over the place, but I'm not. From a storyteller point of view, the number one thing you have to do with your characters, if you really want to make great characters, this is a lesson that it took me a while to learn. I tried to beat it. I tried so many times. It doesn't you have to find out how your characters are flawed, or they have an impediment, or there's something that just they don't have what they need at the beginning of the story. And if you do not have this essential element, you do not have a story. You have something boring, bland, vanilla. So it's not much different from life. At the beginning of wherever you are right now, there's something that you need to transform and transcend. And until you admit that and accept that and own that and work through that, you are on a fucking flat line. You're not going anywhere. But the moment you start to accept, shit, man, I don't quite add up. I'm a little bit flawed. I got to work this shit out. I got to figure this stuff out. All of a sudden, you send yourself on a journey and an adventure. And it might not be a straightforward line, but I do find that, at least for me, the last thing I'll say about this, if I am humble and I own my flaws, people tend to accept and love that. It's when I'm in denial of them that people tend to reject me because they see through that kind of veneer of bullshit.
Well, in some ways, I would say it's like not necessarily flaws, but like our limits.
Sure.
Might be another. Well, I mean, might both of ways of looking at it might be useful, but I mean, it's interesting. You bring into the realm of sort of like a relationship or like a partner, a life partner, spouse, that kind of thing, looking for that, because just the point that you had made about, well, I want someone to accept me for me and who I am and that sort of a thing. And it's like that's always such a like when I was younger, it was like, yeah, of course, right? Like it's like who I am, and it's like, oh shit, like who am I? Because a lot of it is who we think we are. A lot of, especially, early in a relationship, it's a projection of who we want this person to think of us as being, right? Which there's often a gap there between that. And I don't want to put it in a context of like, there's something wrong with you, right? Like, it's like, there's nothing wrong with you, but we have our shit. We have our patterns. We have, like you said, like none of us are perfect beings as much as we try to portray ourselves as being perfect. But, I think early in a relationship, a lot of that those first beginnings is, I just want to know I can have a good time with you. I want to know, A, that I'm attracted to you and B, that I can have a good time with you. Yeah. Right? Like and so there is sort of like, you're in your fun mode, right? Like, let's go and be fun and do things and da-da-da-da-da. And as you go further into a relationship, like I've been with my wife now for 12 years and counting now. And, it's like, that's a lot of like where you keep going deeper, and those, your flaws and your who you are can be so reflected back to you, as you go, you're moving into different times in your life, and like it's things change. Like just over this summer here, my wife and I, we had like an opportunity, like where we got to leave our son with grandma for the night, and we had an Airbnb and got to have some time together. And, we got into some stuff, like we, like good. It wasn't like, we were really, but like we got into some stuff, and I shared some things with her, and she said something to me where she said, "Oh, wow, you have an ego that really doesn't like to be seen." And I was just like, whoa, like, I'm still sitting with that one. Like, I'm still sitting with that one. Like but I was like, holy shit, that is so true. I have an ego that works very hard at trying to not be an ego, like not being seen for what it is. Right. But it's like when you start you really don't have to peel that far back. And then you start to go, oh, holy shit. Yeah, I've got this whole thing that's going on there that is something I really try to hide from people because I'm a little bit ashamed of it, right? And it's something that I was kind of sharing with you, it's like talking about projections, to a certain degree, but like, so it was a thing about that's something to do with like being kind of like the guy in about something, like in being, a big teacher, being a big, whatever, and that was important, that I was that person, you know, and just going like, oh, holy shit, yeah, I do work very hard at that. Like, even though that's such a thing that has been driving me, it's something that I don't even almost want to admit to myself, because I go, oh, like, it's so egotistical. That's so whatever, but there it is. Right. And I think that kind of, just that kind of honesty, right? Like, I think, I think it was Ram Dass, in a book that I have of Ram Dass, that, he said, like, in any sort of person who's on a spiritual journey, or sort of like a consciously spiritual journey, so like I think he said something like the first tool that you need to learn is honesty. It's like, is how to really, especially like not just honest with other people, but being honest with yourself about things, and just being like, oh yeah, there's this part of me that's really running a lot of the show here. And I see that that's coming from this place that's a little bit unsavory. It's like a part that I kind of, I don't know how to put it exactly, but like a part that I wish wasn't there. Right. And in many ways I pretend isn't there. And that's part of it too. That's part of that ego. It's like, oh, just pretend it's not there. Right. But that allows a thing to just kind of grow and fester and do its thing and be destructive, which is typically what the ego is doing. It's being destructive, usually in some kind of way. I don't know exactly where I was going with this, or how this came about, but it's like, there's, like, we've been talking about risk, right? That's what this is all about. We've been talking about risk, putting yourself out there, knowing yourself. I don't know. Yeah, jump in here, Brandon. Save me.
Okay, well, I'll save you. I had a thought while you were talking about the ego, and I would argue that the ego, it's one of its main, well, I'd say at least one of its key things that it's trying to do is trying to keep you safe. It's trying to protect you. It's a mask in a sense. It's like, this is the idea of who I am, and people kind of accept that, And we all kind of play this masquerade game of like, this is the idea of who I am, and we'll go, okay, that's the idea of who you are. That's who you're. Like, we kind of, I think when you become kind of consciously aware of the ego, you kind of recognize this, like, okay, this is the game we're all playing, and this is the character you're choosing to play, and I recognize that this is your character. And I think when you become more conscious, you go, I recognize that is a kind of a being playing a character, and then you see that character kind of as the ego. I'd say maybe how this relates is that ego becomes synonymous with self, and that becomes problematic, and it becomes flawed. Because you pointed out something earlier, and I wanted to make this really clear. You as a being are not flawed. You are perfect. Like, everything you've done as a being has been chosen because of the life experience you had, and the ego you chose, and the decisions you made, and who you're playing all make perfect sense, and you are perfect in your choices. I think what we're talking about to some degree also is that as you become conscious, you begin to see the choices you made from an unconscious place as your limits and flaws. So when I think about, like, say, creating a character, right? I'm writing this one character as a detective, and he is estranged from his wife. He doesn't talk to his son, who's like a teenage kid who's super defiant to him, because he's like a detective and like in law enforcement. His kid's kind of like rebellious to that and almost kind of borderline criminal. Not really, but like kind of almost, it's a father-son type of dynamic, right? And the part of the reason why, him and his wife are having struggles and they're kind of separated is a lot to do with the fact that he's so obsessed with like this case and like certain things in his career. And he lost his father when he was like younger. And so he saw certain things that, he's trying to protect his family from, but in a way that creates this flaw. But his whole ego, his whole identity is like, I'm this detective. I'm solving criminal cases. I'm protecting. I'm doing this stuff. And people don't seem to understand like the sacrifices and all the stuff I have to make. And if you follow, and I built out a lot with this story, but if you follow his life, if you were to live his life and know his story and see what I've created, which doesn't even really get incorporated so much into you're never even going to see like you're only going to see a fraction of it, I should say. But the thing is like any person, it makes perfect sense why he is the way he is and why his life is the way he is and why he does things the way he does them. It all makes perfect sense. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with him as a being. But the charade that he's playing, this character that he's chosen to kind of be, this perspective of the world might be flawed. And so what I'm saying, I think when it comes down to this and kind of what you're pointing out about this ego that doesn't want to be seen, it makes perfect sense, but it's a flaw. And when you become conscious of it, you begin to see yourself and go, well, shit, I'm playing out this thing that is actually a limit, as you said, or an impediment, or it's stopping me from being able to open up and have the life I want to have and do the things I want to do. And you come to a point where you have to risk letting go of the armor you built as a child to embrace this new version of yourself. And it's like you're doing a little bit of a character swap midlife. And the thing is you think that's you. That's why it's so fucking hard to do, because it's like, I mean, even me, I had some fucking rough betrayals and things like that happen in my life. And there's a little bit of me that's a little bit jaded and a little bit fucking angry and a little bit hurt. And I have to risk letting that go to some degree. I have to risk letting go of that identity that's been built to protect me from that ever happening again. And that's fucking scary. Because it's like, well, what if it happens again? And it's like, well, yeah, but that's not you. You were just... That makes perfect sense why you did that. It makes perfect sense why you did that. But now it's stopping you. Now it's limiting you. Now it's making you get on this really safe train again. The risk would be, can you take that armor off? Can you stop? Can you choose something that's more in line with your true heart and values? And yeah, that's scary. Yeah, that's a risk. But also, like, that is the only way to free yourself of the prison or the chains that you put on yourself.
Man, it's occurring to me like it's interesting that we've landed on this, or sort of we're talking about the ego in a very sort of broad sense here, but it makes sense that we've landed here. I wasn't quite sure what that whole tie was, where it's like, how do we go from risk, talking about risks, and now we're talking about the ego? And a connection that I'm seeing form here is that part of when like we feel like we're taking a risk or the potential of being risky or taking a risk on something is because it's something that's coming up on the ego's zone, the ego's no-go zone of some kind. Because when I think of like when I'm in the zone acting and I'm just so completely present, I'm not thinking about myself. I'm 100% just my focus is on the other person and what's happening, right? And things just start coming out of me. And it's just like, and I don't feel myself. I don't have the self-consciousness to understand myself as taking risks, right? Even though someone might, tell me afterwards, like, whoa, what a risky choice that you made, but blah, 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 right? The reason it doesn't feel that way is because there is that presence. That self-consciousness is not there when it's happening. But it's when the ego comes in and it's just like, oh, there's this image. There's this person who I think I am. And this thing might change that. I might lose this thing. And who knows what the fuck is going to happen if we lose this thing? What if people start seeing us in a different way? What if What if I start seeing myself in a different way? There's all, and that's all. The ego doesn't like that shit. You know, like it's the ego's the original sort of curator, right? Like it's where it's, and again, like, because it's not to come entirely vilify, you know, the ego, because I do think that it plays a kind of important role, and that's like as far as like one of protection, but it's for most of us, I think typically it's overreached itself, like really overreached itself into its usefulness, right? Because of the things that we're talking about, because it's the thing that stands in the way of those risks, right? Which is from this talk that you were listening to, it's like that's the thing that kind of, for the most part, breeds success more than hard work, right? Not that, again, that's not important, but that ability to go and take those leaps, right? To, again, I would say the risks are just following the things that are calling you, right? Following those threads that life hands out, and you're just like, I want to go that direction, right? Or something is telling me to go in this direction. And I mean, man, talking about storytelling, that's one of the oldest stories. Some of the great mythic stories always have some element of leaving home. You've got to fucking leave this thing that you're comfortable with. You got to leave this thing that you've built. And you've got to go out into the fucking wild. Because you're going to find something out in that wild, right? And it's going to, and you've got to leave all of this like, what? But this is who I am. This is all these things that I've done. And this thing that calls to my heart and calls to my soul is telling me to do this thing. That's fucking scary, right? But it's scary because of the things that we've built, right? I think I can't remember who it was, but it was like, I remember hearing the statement, which was, we don't fear the unknown, we fear losing what we have. And that's stuck in there where I'm just like, ooh, yeah, that's there's a lot of truth to that. Like, it's not necessarily, I think that for many of us, we would more often go and take those quote unquote risks and go and do the kind of thing that doesn't make complete sense to us and whatever, if we knew that everything that we had was going to stay the same, that was all going to be okay. And very often that's something that we actually try and do, right? It's like, okay, well, if I change my schedule to this, and if I do that, you know, like try and make sure that the thing that we've built remains in, you know, relatively in the same form to the best of our ability, then we're like, okay, now we'll go and do the thing, right? And there's the rare people who are just like, oh, I'm just gonna go, you know, and they have that sort of freedom, I guess. They feel that sense of freedom to just go. But you know, it's interesting. I've never thought about that sort of mythic structure in the way of like ego and image. You know, it's like you think of you know, I just think of like the story of like the Odyssey, right? And Odysseus, you know, like taking off and couldn't come back for 10 years, right? And he was like the king. He was the king of his city, right? And he left it all, right? And, you know, part of like the thematic story is that it's like it took the 10 years for him to learn how to become a king, how to become a husband, how to become a father, all of these things. He had to disappear and run into all these trials and tribulations and challenges and face life in a way that he had never faced before. And so that he could be a wise leader, right? But anyhow, you know, he comes back a different person, right? And that's so often, I mean, it's such a beautiful story that's as old as, you know, humans have been able to tell stories, with that component of You have to leave home. You have to leave that ego a little, at least a little bit sometimes, to follow these risks, right? Sometimes you have to do it. And because there's this image that we have of ourselves that we've put a lot of stock into, and what will happen to us if something happens to that.
Wow, man, that was really insightful. I totally resonate with that. This whole idea of risk being that we're scared, not so much of the unknown, but of losing something. I think that's more and more have I found that to be true in my life. And, I remember we did Dov Simmons' filmmaking workshop back in the day. And I remember Dov being like, take a risk, make your film. Like, what are you worried about? Like, people are going to sue you for your 3 DVDs that you own? Like, who gives a shit? You don't own anything yet. Go for it. Because he was like kind of speaking to us younger filmmakers who were kind of, and there is a certain truth to that. Like when you're younger, you didn't really own a lot. You didn't have a lot. You hadn't established a lot. You hadn't really even figured out who you were. So like there, in a way, risk was a little bit easier in the sense that there was a sense of like, yeah, well, I don't even know who I am anyway. So let's go fucking out there and find out. So the adventure was easier to kind of step into. What I found as I've gotten older, the fear of losing things has become so much more pronounced in my life. And I could only imagine what it would be like for somebody who's a parent who has children and, and they've established certain things in their life. I could only imagine how fucking scary that would be, because I do think we build a lot of our identity around the things we own and the family we have. One of my favorite quotes is from the movie Fight Club, and it's the things we own end up owning us. And I feel like the ego is like that, very much the same. It's like you built this thing, you curated this thing, you are this person. And then the risk means, yeah, but if you take that risk, you could lose that thing you spent so long curating. And that's so scary. And I think that's why we often choose the safe choice. But I think one of the key elements that I'd like to kind of point out here that I'm taking away from this is that risk requires putting something on the line that you can lose. It means that you can't kind of have your cake and eat it too. You can't have the cake and eat it. You either have the cake or you eat it. It's like, and the thing is that this thing that you're giving up, and I think in some ways it's not like, can I keep it and have the thing? It's kind of like, no, I have to literally give it up. It's not like, well, maybe I'll keep it too. It's like, no, this will go, but you have to have the kind of the faith and the trust that something else is going to come and take its place and replace it. I can, here's a great example. Being in a toxic relationship romantically, and you're with this person and you love them and you really are committed to them and you want it to work, and like, it's toxic and people are saying, hey, like maybe this isn't so good and whatever. And you're scared to leave that person in a way because you've built so much and committed so much to that relationship. But if you let that relationship go, you would create the space for a healthy relationship, something that would actually serve you and probably them. But I think a lot of times, and this happened to me, where I've stayed with a toxic relationship because I was so scared to kind of lose it that I didn't know what the unknown would be. But I don't know if I was so scared of the unknown. I was more scared of losing, even though, it was bad. And the thing is I think sometimes with like a toxic relationship, or maybe even, it doesn't even have to be a relationship, a toxic ego or a toxic workplace or a toxic anything. You eventually, if you change, you get to a point where there's more pain than there is pleasure or purpose in keeping it. And so risk becomes the natural evolution. Like you decide to go on without it because you're like, it's not worth it to even keep it at this point. But in some ways, I would argue that isn't even really as much of a risk because you still played it safe. You played it safe until it got so bad you had to do something about it. Whereas I think, a lot of this conversation is about, can you take that risk before you get forced to make that choice? Can you do it out of your own kind of free will and courage and consciousness to go, hey, you know what? Like, I know this is bad for me, And before it gets so bad that I'm forced to do something about it, let me do something about it now. And, that could be like, for the people who are like, oh, and I've always wanted to make a film. I've always wanted to write a script, or I've always wanted to go do this thing. And it's like, but I have this job, and the job's, but I fucking hate it, and I can't wait to get done from work, and I can't wait to just get into my weekend, and the fucking people I work with I don't like, and they talk about these two same things. And it's like, well, are you willing to give up the job now to go? And I'm not even saying you have to give up the job full out, but like, are you willing to take a step knowing that you may lose this thing that you built, maybe this career, maybe this thing you have, to potentially step into the life that you really want? And I think that there's been many times for myself where I've gotten to the point where I've been forced to make a decision. And maybe I've even tried to like almost accredit that self to me, like, yeah, I left this thing and took a risk. But it's like, no, if I'm really honest with myself, I'd say, no, that you didn't take a risk. You played it safe until you were forced to move. The times I've taken a risk is when I've not been forced, when I've done it before the pressure has become so much that I had to, where I took a bet on myself and I went for it and I tried, and, something I think that's interesting about this conversation, which is really standing out to me right now, is that the more risk you take, the more luck you have. I would say that the risk is, are you willing to give up something that you like that is holding you back before you have to give it up? And that's where risk exists. Because like right now you have an ego, you said, I'm just going to use this as an example. Or your wife said, an ego that doesn't want to be seen. Now you can live with this and you can continue to persist on this story. I have my own, whatever. We're using you for the moment. But let's say that you let that ego, there's an outcome. I don't know if you'll be forced to change. You might be able to retain it for the rest of your life, but maybe there'll be a point where you're forced to change. I guess the question really comes down to you, or for anybody, is are you willing to give that thing up to embrace whatever it is that you really, truly, more authentically want to be, even though you don't have to right now? I think that's where risk exists. Because I'm thinking about myself, when I've been forced to do it, it's like, well, what risk did I really take? It was kind of like I was between a rock and a hard place. But when I make a choice where it's like, I'm not forced, that's where I step in. That's where some part of me steps in and actually goes for it. So I don't know, maybe you have thoughts on that.
No, I think you bring up a very interesting distinction there. And I think that you're probably pretty right on about that one, because yeah, like the moment it feels like a risk means you're stepping into the uncomfortable. It means, yeah, like you're consciously going into it as opposed to unconsciously, I guess, right? Whereas, because yeah, like when you're forced to do it, it's just like, okay, well, this is just what has to be done, and it might still feel uncomfortable and whatever, but it's like it's kind of the only option, right? And it there's a bit of a different quality to that than as to when you're not in that situation, in a situation where you're forced to do something, but you're going into it anyhow, right? So one thing that came up to me that I just thought about, and coming back again to acting, it's one thing that happens in a lot of acting classes for anybody who hasn't taken one before. And if you have, you might be very familiar with this, but a teacher will often get a class pretty early on to do some pretty absurd things, like I'm going to get you to freaking like crawl around and make noises like an elephant, in front of everybody, or just do something so that feels so silly and so foolish. And a big part of that is because, in sort of the acting world, it's just like, you can't be afraid to feel like a fool. Mm-hmm. Right? Like And that's like a, there's a kind of wisdom to doing that sort of a thing, because it is like throwing that ego in check. It's like, hey, we're having a confrontation with the ego right now, because you're probably going to feel really stupid doing this in front of everybody, and having to do some crazy gesture and make weird sounds and move around like an idiot, that you would normally never do. But there's something about it, because it's like, well, what's going to happen to you? What's so bad? Like, you're going to come through at the end of it and you're going to be fine. You're going to be totally fine. Right? It's like, maybe the only thing we're all going to see is like, is your silly side. Right? And it's kind of a safe place to explore that thing, in a way. It's like, I see why something like, I might start incorporating that into some of my own classes, to be honest with you, because I never totally saw the value, but now that I see like the value of it, I'm like, yeah, especially for people who aren't necessarily, they're either very green actors, or sometimes people go into acting classes because they're looking to confront some of their boundaries, right? Like, a lot of people do that. And that's an incredible thing. That's taking that risk by going and saying, like, I just feel called to go and do an acting class because, they have some intuition that it's like, I'm all bottled up, right? I've got like my ego's kind of like too reined in, too tight, and I need to go and put myself up in front of people. And, and acting's a pretty extreme way to do that for a lot of people. It's just like, you're going to get up and you're going to perform in front of an audience, and, and then the first class, you're going to make me get up here and, act like a fucking monkey. And then you're not going to let me just kind of phone it in with like a quick little, yeah, okay. It's like, no. Give me monkey. Like, really, like get down there, hunch down, fucking move your fucking arms around, like, give me fucking monkey, right? And it's just like, oh, it's like, and it feels so terrible, like there's something that feels so awful and embarrassing and all of this stuff, but it's like, let's just blast through this, because that whole thing is stopping you. There's a whole side of yourself that you've shut down, right? And very often, I think that's what curiosity is, right? That very often, that's what calling is a whole side of you that you've shut down for some reason, right? Maybe some very good reasons. But there's this thing that's still there, and it's still calling. That's the frickin' the bane of the artist, right? Which is just like, oh, this thing's still calling me, and I have to, and you have to go, like you have to go, not knowing where it's going to go, but just knowing that you have to, right? Because something important is there, right? And kind of letting go of like knowing what it is, that's the important thing. It's just like, because that can be a trap too. It's like, I have to go and do this because I have to achieve this with this thing. And it's like, that might not have anything to do with it. Maybe you've got to go and take that acting class and feel like an idiot and do this thing so that, you can have better relationships with people. Maybe that's what comes out at the end of it. You're able to just drop some part of yourself that's just trying to hold up that image, right? The ego trying to hold up that image and be like, oh, okay, you know what? We can do away with that part of me. I don't have to feel so anxious and fearful about showing more of what's real and genuine and true about me, because that's in many ways the big risk, right? That's really the true risk is, or at least that's what it feels like, is if people knew who I really was, right? Because we're the only ones that are with us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, who know the things that we think about, who the stuff that we go, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe I just thought that, like, and And it's like, if people only knew the things that were going on in here, and it's like, hey, guess what? We're all, we're all doing that, right? And it's allowing more and more of our true selves to be seen. That's kind of the ultimate risk, I guess, or at least it feels that way. But it only feels that way again because it's like the untrue parts of ourselves that are afraid of that.
Yeah. Okay, I know we're getting to that witching hour, but I'll say this: there's an interesting element to this conversation, which is that there is kind of a part of this world that would rather an illusion, I think, than the truth. And the truth is actually conflicts with the illusion. And when you are not playing by the illusion that people want to have, it'll sometimes get them upset, and they might bully or taunt or do certain things that, like, because they want to retain the illusion. And I think it's kind of that comfort thing. And I think as an artist, if you're going to go down the creative path, the risk is to first decide, I think, well, not first, but at least it's in there in a stage you're going to have to hit at some point, where you're going to have to decide to give up the illusion and move towards the truth. And the truth is not going to be as pretty and comforting and sweet as the illusion. But the illusion is not as wonderful as it seems. And I think when you have a calling to move out of it, you kind of deep down know that. But the risk is that, like, when you become an artist, you look like a weirdo to everybody in normal culture. Like, it's just because, like, they aren't dancing like idiots or playing as monkeys or something. Like, they aren't doing those exercises. You know what I'm saying? Like, sorry, but I was like, but then, like, that can become another ego thing too, where you see, like, you can see a group of artists all wearing like the zaniest kind of like stuff too, and that becomes that becomes another ego as well. That's limiting, that can be kind of limit. Well, and I think is an important thing to point out, which you brought something very interesting, is that the ego is not just determined to you. It's not like your ego is, oh, this is who I am. It's actually more, your ego is, this is who we are. And something I learned in psychology is, in Western culture, we tend to be quite individualistic. We tend to think about ourselves separate from society and culture as a whole. Whereas in Eastern, people have a difficult time seeing themselves as a separate entity compared to their community. They actually see themselves more because of the way the social structures are in the Eastern side of thinking about things. And there's problems with both. We have problems when we're too individualistic, and we have problems when we're too community-based.
They're both true.
Yeah, they're both true, but the problem is we have a focus. So, these acting troupes where everybody's like acting like a weirdo together, you're still in a safety net. You haven't found the truth. All you've done is found acceptance in a group which accepts you as a weirdo, which allows you to basically just play it safe, but in a way that makes you think or pretend that you're outside. We're a subculture. Same thing happens with cults. Same thing happens with any type of subgroup. I think the key thing is to understand that, and this is not easy, I can struggle with this all the time, is to see that you are in some ways a piece of all humanity and somehow connected to everyone, and somehow you're all a part of everyone, and that ultimately you have chosen or decided upon values, or values make sense to you to go a certain way and direct yourself or put attention towards something which makes you look different than everyone else. And understanding at the same time that everyone else's choices make perfect sense to them, just as yours make sense to you. And to try, and this is not easy, but to try not to make yourself right. Like, I have found the way, and why doesn't everyone see that I have the way? And why doesn't everyone just get it like I do? And it's like, yeah, but you might be fucking wrong. And you might be right, but you also might be wrong. And they might be right, and they might be wrong. And you have a very difficult time discerning between right and wrong ultimately. And that's where the humility and the flaw comes in, because then you go, well, I built this personality based on all my life experiences, and it makes perfect sense on who I am, and it's serving me here, but it's actually holding me back here. And so, you know what? I'll try moving over into this direction and see if that helps. And I'll try moving over into this direction and see if that helps. And sometimes you're going to fuck it up. Sometimes you're going to make mistakes. Sometimes you're going to do it wrong. But the thing is you're trying. And I think, I'm going to pass this on to you and share the beer. But one last thing I would say is that something that really stands out to me in this conversation is that conscious risk leads to luck. Unconscious risk is more what we're all doing. Like, we all take risks. Just leaving your fucking house is a risk. Like, going outside, trying to cross the street is a risk. This might be fucking small, but it's a risk. The safest thing you can do is stay in bed, stay under covers, and just fucking, but then that's a risk. There's a risk in that, so like, no matter what you do, there are risks. But I think what makes this conversation kind of interesting is, can you kind of hijack your unconscious life and take conscious risks that in small ways help you redefine the trajectory or direction of your life in a way where you get to kind of answer your calling or go towards your vision or whatever that might be. And, and I think that's the thing, is like, can I leave my nest? Can I leave my safety zone and venture out, knowing that I could lose my safety zone as I venture out? And I think that's kind of, that's part of the demand of an artist. And I think that's a lot of what this conversation is about, for me, at least at this point. Anyway, let me share the beer. I'm going to pass it on to you. And then we'll wrap this up. Well, this was Stanley Park Brewing Park Sesh Lager. It's a nice little chill lager. I mean, I feel like it's a good, refreshing beer. It's nothing special, but it's, it's good. I always find lagers, like, just give me a good, solid lager that's refreshing and cold and cool and nice. That's what this is. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily write home about it. I'm being honest, but I wouldn't turn my nose up at it either. And I feel like I'd say that about most lagers. But I haven't been enjoying this one for this conversation.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Pretty much everything you said on there. It's been good. It's a lager. It does what a lager needs to do, which is be cold, crisp, refreshing, easy to drink. It's all of those things. Check marks. Nothing that really just stands out about it as being something kind of really special in particular, but it does what it's supposed to do for a lager. So, I've enjoyed it as well. And now here we are. At the end of this conversation, trying to wrap this one up. This has been a really interesting conversation, not knowing what it was going to go into. It was interesting, that, because I didn't know what you were going to come in with at the start here, but bringing this thing of risk and where it led us, it's been really fascinating to just follow it and see where it's gone. It's definitely given me some stuff to just sort of sit with and ponder. And I feel like there's been some discoveries, I guess, and new understandings, I suppose. I don't necessarily know how I want to finish this, but I think that I'll just say that, yeah, there's things that, okay, you know what? This came up in my mind, so I'm going to take a little page out of this conversation and put it into action. I was afraid to share this quote because it's a biblical one, but it is wise. So I'm going to share it. Those who seek to save their lives will lose it. Those who give up their lives will find it. has a lot to do with, I think, what we're talking about, right? And it's like, whoa, I mean, there's so many ways in which you could apply that too, but to this conversation and a lot of things we're talking about, I think that's freaking right on. You know, it's like if we try to hold on to these constructs of ourselves at our detriment, at our own peril, we hold on to these falsities about ourselves, our image, who we are. Can't go and do that. No, can't do that. Can't. All of the things that are real for us, the place that we're genuinely called to go to in our lives. How often do we say no for all kinds of very practical reasons, you know? But at the end of the day, we're diminished. Who we are, the people we are, these incredible, perfect human beings that we are deep down. How much is that diminished because we don't follow that call? We lose our lives that way, right? But if we give up, can you give up some of this shit that you say about yourself, try and show about yourself, try and convince other people about yourself, even convince yourself about yourself? That is just not true. By giving that up, you will find something. You will find something about yourself, and that thing that you will find is something that's true about yourself and about life and about who freaking even knows what you might find. So I guess take those risks, take those risks, follow that thread. No matter how kind of vague and obscure it might seem and unclear about what it's for and why it's for, all of these things, start taking some more of those chances, some of those risks, and just go into it with that open-minded curiosity. And it's like, okay, all right, let's just go this way. I don't know why, but let's go this way because I feel compelled. Some part of me is pulled by some kind of gravity into this place that is outside of what is normal for me. Go and see through on that thing. Where is it? Where that thing might lead you, because no matter what, it's leading you to a more authentic life.
Wow, man, I really love that. That is so true. It's like, by trying to save yourself, it's just you're clinging to the smallness of who you think you are. And, by letting that go, you're opening yourself up to this possibility. And I think, it's an interesting thing in life where I think being smaller, playing smaller, being safe, being practical, all of that, it keeps us safe and it keeps a certain kind of consistency for the most part. I mean, there's a risk in that in and of itself, of course, but I think there's a lot of kind of like, well, as long as I'm okay, as long as everything's all right, and there's a diminishing that occurs with this kind of commitment to safety and this commitment to smallness and stuff. And it's, it's an interesting thing where like you end up losing things. And, when you get to a certain age, you start to lose things. You start to lose like your fitness level you put on weight easier. It's harder to do things. You don't heal as fast. People die. Things happen, right? And so there's this, in the later part of your life, you begin to experience the things you took for granted kind of getting taken away. And I think there can be a fight against that. I think there can be, I think sometimes people find a sense of gratitude suddenly. They start to realize, hey, man, I'm grateful I got this. Or maybe you see someone else lose something before you do, and then you go, shit, I still have this. I should really appreciate it. And I think that, there's a saying that I've heard, it's like youth is wasted on the young or something like that. But I think is like, there's a wisdom to that too. It's like when you're young, you're like, you have all this energy and just everything, your body is like in this, what you're capable of, your healing ability, everything is just kind of, in this prime state. And as you get beyond that point, you then go, shit, man, I was so hard on myself. I can't tell you how many people I've had conversations with who they were like, I was so beautiful when I was younger and I was so hard on myself. And they look back and they appreciate their youth, but they couldn't see it at the time. And they're like, and it's so interesting. Like, I feel like we can all take a piece of that, right? Where it's like, if you play safe, you just kind of like, you let everything just slide away. And I think there's a certain element of this conversation, which is interesting to me, where it's like, whatever it is that I think I'm scared to lose, whoever it is that I think I am, I need to let it go. It doesn't need to be this. It made perfect sense up until today, up until this very moment. Everything I've been and everything that I think I am and every story I've told makes absolutely perfect sense. And I did nothing wrong. But also, this could be the last page of this chapter in this book. We can start now on this new one. And yeah, would that be a risk to like close this book and begin a new one? And also, does that mean that I have to give up this book that is my life and is my past and is my story? And it goes, well, yeah, maybe. Because maybe that story is being told poorly. Maybe it's not being told right. And maybe this new version of yourself would not tell the story the same way. And so that, will you lose things? Will you lose people? Will you lose connections? Will you lose certain things? Yeah. But you can focus on that, or you can focus on what you're now opening yourself up to gain, what you're now opening yourself up to experience. And I guess I would say, if I was an older version of me, I could only project, I would probably look back and say to myself today, I would say, the fact that you have the ability to choose now is exactly why you should. Because there will be a day where you don't get to choose anymore. And if that day can become present now and you recognize, hey, I have a chance to go for this thing that I've always dreamed of doing. I have a chance to try this thing out. I have a chance to be or play or do whatever. Well, one day you might not have that chance. So why not take it now? Because the worst thing could be that you get to that point where you no longer have a choice and you look back and you go, I wish I did.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.